I never imagined I'd be here, writing this post and sharing my deepest, most painful secret with the internet. But sometimes, when your world comes crashing down, you need to let it out, hoping that somehow the words will make sense of the chaos in your mind. I, 29M, have been married to my wife, Sarah, 26F, for 5 years. She's beautiful, smart, and everything I thought I ever wanted. We've had our fair share of problems like any couple: small arguments, disagreements over finances, the usual stuff. But nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal I discovered a few weeks ago. To paint the picture better, I should talk a little about my father. He's always been a larger-than-life figure, charming, persuasive, and the kind of guy people naturally gravitate towards. He's 55 now, but he's kept himself in great shape. Growing up, he was my hero. He built a successful business from the ground up and had a way of commanding respect without ever raising his voice. I've always been close to him, looked up to him, and wanted to be like him. When I met Sarah, I introduced her to my father early on. She seemed to admire him, maybe even more than I realized. At first, I was glad they were close. I thought it was a good thing that my wife and father got along so well. But now, in hindsight, I see how naive I was. Sarah and I met in college. She was studying English literature, and I was in engineering. We clicked immediately. She was witty, full of life, and we balanced each other out. We dated for a couple of years before getting married. In those early days, everything seemed perfect. I remember our honeymoon in Bali, where we talked about our dreams and our future together. But like any marriage, reality set in. I got caught up in my job, and the pressures of daily life began to chip away at the carefree couple we once were. I didn't realize that in trying to provide for our future, I was neglecting the present. Sarah began to withdraw, and our relationship cooled. I thought it was just a phase, something every couple went through, but she was drifting away from me, emotionally and physically. My father, on the other hand, has always been someone who could charm anyone. At family gatherings, he'd captivate everyone with his stories. Sarah was no exception. She'd always light up when he was around, but I chalked it up to his charisma. There were signs, looking back, little things that didn't seem significant at the time. The way he'd always compliment her, the way she'd laugh at his jokes a little too hard. I brushed it off. I was too trusting, too blind. I never imagined my father would betray me. It all started to unravel one ordinary Tuesday evening. I came home early from work, a rarity for me. Sarah wasn't expecting me. The moment I stepped into the house, I felt something was off. It was too quiet. I could hear faint voices coming from the living room.
At first, I didn't think much of it, but as I got closer, I realized one of the voices was my father's. My father lives an hour away, and it was odd for him to be at my house in the middle of the week, unannounced. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to listen in. I could hear them talking in hushed, almost urgent tones. I heard my father's deep voice say, "We can't keep doing this. Someone's going to find out." Sarah replied, her voice trembling, "I know, but I can't help how I feel. I can't just turn it off." My heart stopped. My hands started to shake, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father and my wife were having an affair. I couldn't confront them right there. I was frozen. I felt like I'd stepped into some twisted alternate reality where nothing made sense. I backed away quietly and left the house, my mind spinning. I drove around for hours that night, trying to process what I had just heard. My thoughts were a jumbled mess: anger, betrayal, disbelief. How could they do this to me? How long had this been going on? I wanted to confront them both, but I knew I needed more proof. I needed to be sure. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I started paying closer attention to Sarah's behavior. I noticed how she was glued to her phone, always smiling at some text she was reading. She'd go out more often, claiming she was meeting friends or running errands, but her excuses were becoming less and less believable. I decided to check her phone when she was in the shower one day. She'd always been careful, but that day she left it unlocked. I saw a series of messages from my father. They weren't explicit, but they were enough to confirm my suspicions. They'd been meeting up at hotels, sneaking around while I was at work or away. The more I uncovered, the more it felt like a knife was being twisted in my gut. I kept wondering how I hadn't seen it before. Was I that blind, that trusting? I felt like a fool. I started to remember all the times my father had been overly affectionate with Sarah, the lingering hugs, the compliments that seemed a little too personal, the way he always found a reason to touch her arm or shoulder. I had brushed it off as him just being friendly, but now it all seemed so obvious. How had I missed it? There were more signs, more pieces to the puzzle that only became clear after I started to dig. I remembered a few months ago when I caught Sarah sneaking out of the house late at night. She had claimed she was just going for a walk to clear her head. She seemed stressed, distant. I thought she was dealing with anxiety or depression. I tried to be supportive, but it wasn't enough. I was too focused on my own stress, my own work. I didn't see that she was slipping away from me. As I continued to dig deeper, I started to piece together more of their secret meetings. There were countless late-night rendezvous when I thought Sarah was out with friends. I remember one night, about 3 months ago, when she came home well past midnight. She smelled of expensive cologne, one that wasn't mine. I asked her about it, and she laughed it off, saying she'd been out with some friends who wore heavy perfumes. At the time, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But now, every excuse, every story seemed like part of a web of lies she had spun around me. Sarah often stayed up late, claiming she couldn't sleep and needed to go for a drive. I noticed these drives became more frequent, almost a nightly ritual. Once, I tried to wait up for her, but I must have dozed off. She returned at 3 a.m., quietly sneaking into bed. She thought I was asleep, but I felt her slip under the covers. Her phone would buzz occasionally in the middle of the night. She always had an excuse, claiming it was a friend who was going through a rough time and needed to talk. I was suspicious, but didn't want to seem like a paranoid husband. In reality, those late-night drives were meetups with my father at secluded spots or cheap motels where no one would recognize them. I recalled an instance when I'd gone out of town for a business trip. I came back a day early because my meeting had been canceled. I expected to surprise Sarah. When I walked in, the house was dark except for the dim light of the living room. I found Sarah on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She jumped when she saw me, almost like she was caught doing something she shouldn't have been. I asked her what was up, and she muttered something about not being able to sleep. But there was a tension in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place. I brushed it off again, thinking I was just tired. Now, I realized she was probably waiting for my father to show up, expecting I'd be gone. The confrontation with Sarah was brutal. I waited until she came home from one of her errands, and I asked her directly. She tried to deny it at first, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Eventually, she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. She admitted it had been going on for almost a year. She tried to justify it by saying she felt neglected and lonely because of my long work hours, and my father had been there for her. She said it started out as just emotional support, but things got out of hand. She insisted she still loved me and begged for forgiveness. I didn't know what to say. I felt like everything I knew, everything I trusted, had been ripped away from me. I left the house that night. I couldn't bear to be there. I called my father the next day, and he didn't even bother denying it. He sounded almost calm, as if he'd rehearsed this conversation in his head 1,000 times. He said he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt me, but he developed feelings for Sarah. I couldn't believe it. My own father, my hero, the person I looked up to the most, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The fallout from that confrontation was nuclear. My mother was devastated when she found out. She's always been the rock of our family, but this revelation shattered her. She couldn't believe my father was capable of such betrayal. Their marriage, which had seemed solid and unshakable, was now crumbling. My mother struggled to cope, leaning heavily on me for support. I felt torn between comforting her and grappling with my own pain. My sister was in disbelief. She was close to both Sarah and me, and this scandal put her in an agonizing position. She wanted to be supportive, but couldn't reconcile with the idea that her own grandfather and sister-in-law had betrayed her brother. Her confusion and anger only added to the chaos in our family. In the midst of all this turmoil, I discovered another layer to the deception. My uncle, my father's brother, had seen my father and Sarah together at a hotel a few months ago. He had confronted my father privately, but was sworn to secrecy. I felt an additional sting of betrayal, knowing that someone else in the family had known and kept quiet. The days that followed were a blur of emotional upheaval. I avoided contact with my father and Sarah, focusing instead on my own healing. I threw myself into therapy, hoping it would help me navigate this crushing betrayal. The process was grueling. The therapist explained that healing from such deep wounds takes time, and I needed to confront my feelings of anger, grief, and disbelief. My father reached out several times, trying to apologize and explain himself. He insisted that he still loved me and wanted to make amends. But every attempt at reconciliation felt hollow. I couldn't erase the image of him betraying my trust, nor could I forget the way he had hurt my family. Sarah also tried to reach out, sending heartfelt messages about her regret and how she wished things could be different. But her words couldn't undo the damage that had been done. Eventually, the legal process began. The divorce proceedings were messy, complicated by the emotional baggage and legal battles over assets. Every step of the process felt like a fresh wound, reopening old scars. Sarah's attempts at reconciliation were futile. The trust between us was irreparably shattered. My focus shifted to rebuilding my life. I started making new plans, setting new goals, and slowly learning to trust again. It was a long and painful journey, but I was determined to move forward. My support system of friends and family, despite their own struggles, helped me find strength in the midst of the chaos. The impact of the betrayal extended beyond just my immediate family. It affected the entire network of relationships and had a ripple effect on everyone involved. Friends who had once been close allies were now distant, unsure of how to navigate the shifting dynamics. I realized that my father's actions had not only hurt our family, but had also altered the course of many lives connected to ours. As time went on, I found moments of peace amidst the turmoil. I began to understand that while I couldn't change the past, I could shape my future. The process of healing was ongoing, but I was learning to live with the scars and move forward with hope. This entire experience has been a harsh lesson in trust and betrayal. It has shown me the fragility of relationships and the strength required to overcome such deep hurt. It's a journey I never wanted to be on, but I've come out the other side with a greater understanding of myself and the complexities of human relationships. To anyone who has read this far, thank you for letting me share my story. It has been cathartic to write it all down. I'm still navigating the aftermath, still learning and growing, but I'm hopeful for the future. I hope that one day I'll find a place of peace and acceptance in this new reality I've been thrust into. Certainly. Here's a shorter version. Hey everyone. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps me bring you more amazing content. Give this video a thumbs up and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.